Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. Today's video is another instructional video, and it's going to be showing you how to do a simple cleanup or overhaul to a Yashica CC or CCN Electro 35 rangefinder camera. These are really interesting cameras, a compact, very high quality camera with a very fast lens, a 35mm f1.8 lens, which makes it a really good camera for, say, shooting in narrow alleys or indoors or in low light situations. It features much of the same operating system as the full-size Yashica Electro 35s, but in a much more compact design and with the wide-angle lens. So this camera just arrived to me today, and looking at it, it's quite dirty. There's a bunch of dirt and haze inside the viewfinder. The lens is dirty, and I can see a little bit of fungus on the inside. There isn't any physical damage to the camera. There are no dents or scratches or anything like that. It just looks like it's been sitting in its case for a long time. So the first thing I need to do is check and make sure that it works. So I have a fresh 4LR44 battery here, and remove the battery chamber cover, and the first thing I do is I look inside and I look for corrosion. This one is quite clean, so that's a good sign. Drop the battery in so that the red or positive end is pointing outward. You have to be careful not to put in the battery backwards on these. A lot of people do. And then check. Okay, maybe you can see the battery check lamp is working. If you put a battery in here and the check lamp is working, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the camera or the battery is bad. Sometimes the connection is bad. Sometimes if you push on the battery cover and then you press the battery check lamp, it'll start working. And what that usually means is there are the contacts are dirty. Sometimes the contact here or where it contacts the top of the battery chamber here can be dirty. And in the bottom here, the contact where the negative end is supposed to touch, sometimes that gets pushed back and it doesn't have a firm pressure against the back of the battery. You can take a small screwdriver and pry it upwards a little bit, and that'll give it more pressure and increase the connectivity of the battery. Okay, so put this on the right way. Okay, so that's working. The next thing I want to do is see if the light meter and shutter is working. So, okay. Okay, it's firing at different speeds. Slow when I set it to f16 and fast when I have it set to f1.8. So I'm going to take a look through the viewfinder here and see if the LEDs are working. Okay, so the over and under LEDs are working, so pretty much this is a functional camera, and it really just needs a good cleaning up to get it going again. The contacts, the lights are flickering a little bit when I'm depressing the shutter button, so the contacts are a bit dirty, so we'll go ahead and clean those out during the process. Okay, so that's it to start. In the next part of the video, we're going to start by removing the lens assembly and cleaning out the inside and outside of the lenses. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started on cleaning out the lenses. You need a couple of tools for this job. You need a lens spanner like so with points on it. You need a slotted spanner. If you don't have these tools, you can fabricate them. There are a lot of different ways to make them. In the case of the pointed ones, you can use a pair of pliers and needle nose pliers and sharpen the tips. And you can usually open them wide enough to use for camera repair. The slotted ones, you can do a similar thing with something else. There are times when I got into this, I didn't have a lot of tools for camera repair, and I had to fabricate a few of my own. But it's basically a good idea to have the correct tools. But if you're handy, you can usually figure out a way to do the job with tools you have, or modifying the tools you have. So we'll go ahead and get started. And the first thing I do is I put a little bit of naphtha or lighter fluid around the filter ring, because I have to remove the front nameplate, and if I wet it with the naphtha or lighter fluid, it makes it come out easier. The ring is made out of aluminum, so I don't really want to bugger it up taking it out too much. And if I wet it like that, it comes out very, very nice and easy with no marks. So I set that aside. I'll get a couple of filters here to put the hardware in, and I have to drop off the lens nameplate. And next thing I have to do is remove the light meter light baffle, which is held on with a couple of slotted screws. So I can take off, you only have to take off one. There are two which hold it on the top and the bottom. It's better just to take out only one and then drop it out like so. Handle these gently. This is kind of a foil light baffle, which is simply glued onto the ring here, and it's easy to displace it. And if you displace it, you can glue it back on and just make sure that the two holes are lined up on the foil baffle and the metal ring. Okay, you can possibly remove the front lens element from this point, but I want to get in a little deeper in the camera to make sure that everything turns smoothly, and make sure that in case that the ring here decides to turn without removing the entire front element, I can get it off. So remove these three screws which hold on the filter ring, and lift that off. And then this ring here is what actuates the aperture ring. What it does is it presses against this lever here. Taking it off and putting it back on is very simple. You make sure that the film speed scale is on the bottom, and then you pull it that way so it engages the that dowel there, and as you turn it, the ring, you should see that move in and out. Okay, so now I have this off, and I'll go ahead and attempt to remove the front lens element. Okay. And fortunately it's all coming off as a single one piece. Sometimes only the front ring comes off and leaves the rest of the lens group in the bottom. If that happens, what I do is I remove this brass plate by removing these three screws. And put this back on here just to demonstrate what happens. So if only the front ring is coming off and not the entire lens group, make sure that the ring is tight, and then you can simply grasp it like this, being careful not to touch any of the mechanism with the tool. Grasp here and squeeze and give it a twist until it just starts to turn, and then take it off. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is clean the inside of the rear lens element. So what we'll do is charge the shutter, and when I actuate the shutter, you can see this lever popping down. what I want to do is keep the shutter open so I can clean the inside of the rear lens element. So I'll take a cotton swab and some lens cleaning fluid. I'll charge the shutter, and I will put my thumb just under this pin here with the black plastic around it. If I do that and depress the shutter button, the shutter will remain open as long as I hold onto that. And luckily the inside there's no fungus or anything that I can see, no real haze, but I'll clean it up all the same. The 35mm f1.8 lens was what they call a rare earth lens, one which used thorium glass, which is slightly radioactive. Some of these cameras you can notice that the rear elements can be a little bit yellowish at times due to the, I guess, deterioration of the thorium. But it's not enough to cause any harm or to give you cancer or anything like that. It's just a interesting, I guess, interesting fact about these lenses. Okay, so make sure there's no dust in there. Let it close. And I'll go ahead and put this brass plate back on. Okay. Alright, and while I have the front off, it's a good opportunity to clean in places that are really hard to reach around the lens barrel. So when you have these parts, you can kind of clean any dust and gunk which happens to be around here. Alright, next thing we want to do is we need to replace the aperture ring. The aperture ring comes with this little thing here, this plastic thing which is a dust shield with a slot on it, and that slot has to go over where this lever pops out to adjust the film speed. So set it like so, and I can kind of see when it's lined up properly. Okay, and I will go ahead and place this on. Good idea to do, a good thing to do while I have this apart is add a little bit of oil. Use kind of a grease here. I just use a tiny bit of oil. This is a thick oil which I use for lens helicoids. I put that on, pull it down. Okay. And the next thing I have to do is replace this ring here, the filter ring. Just cleaning it off around the outside. Alright, now when you replace the filter ring, you have to be very careful that this light baffle or dust baffle for the ASA adjustment doesn't get pinched down, because if that happens then the aperture ring will be very difficult to turn or may not turn at all. So I kind of put it off to the side here. That's why I haven't put the lens element back on yet. And that way when I put it on, I can push the baffle off to the side and get it out of the way and where it's supposed to be. Now, I learned this the hard way some years ago when I first started working on these cameras. The aperture ring wasn't working right and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it turned out to be that baffle was getting pinched. Alright, and blow out the dust a little bit. Alright, and the next step now is to clean the inside of the front lens element. sure that I don't leave any haze or any wipe marks on the inside. I won't clean too much on the outside because I'm going to have to clean all this again anyway on the outside. I'm just cleaning it off enough to where I can look through and make sure that the inside element is clean. All right. Alright, that's in place. Okay, the next thing I do is I replace the light baffle. I kind of turn the aperture up this way a little bit so this pin moves up toward the top, or depending opposite to where I have the screw remaining. So I'll turn it down toward the bottom and slide it like so. And then this little screw, these ones always give me a little grief because they're kind of hard to line up just right on the inside. That one went in without too much trouble. So put the light baffle. I'll wet this with a little bit of lens fluid, and that'll make it thread on more easily. Alright, and that's it. That's all that's necessary to clean the insides of the lens elements on a Yashica CC or CCN rangefinder camera. The next job we're going to be doing is cleaning out the viewfinder and rangefinder. So I'll be back in just a moment. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started cleaning out the viewfinder and rangefinder. This job is a little bit easier than the last job and requires fewer tools. The only specialized tool you would need is something to remove the nut here on the film winding lever. Sometimes you can get it off with your thumb, like I just did there. And if you can do it that way, then you don't need your pointed spanner or improvised tool. The nut comes off. There's a compression washer underneath. The lever comes off. And then there's a spacer below that. The next thing we have to do is remove the film rewind knob. So we'll pop open the film door and put the screwdriver between the forks and give it a twist. There's always a washer underneath the film rewind knob, so keep track of it and don't lose it. It's necessary so the rewind knob doesn't rub against the top of the camera when you're rewinding the film. Next thing we have to do is remove the 3 Phillips screws which hold on the top cover. There's one on either side and one on the back, just like on the full-size electro cameras. Alright, and when I lift off the top cover, I have to keep track of a couple of things. I have to keep track of the battery check lamp button because that will come off. Another thing I have to watch for is in the flash sync socket there's a small brass pin which when you put in a flash sync cord, it causes the contacts here to push together, and that causes the shutter to fire at the flash sync speed, which is something like 1/30th of a second or something like that. This is necessary if you're using a bulb flash. If you want to use a strobe flash, it can work the same way, or if you simply remove the pin by just dropping it out like that, then the shutter will fire at whatever speed, and then you can have flash at any shutter speed. So usually I just, these tend to get lost when I'm working on these cameras, so I don't worry about it too much. There's a dust cover here which has to come off, and it's kind of a foam seal material on the bottom here around the film rewind knob shaft, which prevents dust from coming in. A couple of things you have to be careful not to lose are this spring here, which goes under the shutter button. Make sure that that's in place. And on the bottom of the shutter button, there's a black thing. I can pop it out like that. Be careful not to lose that. When you these are held in with a little bit of oil, but sometimes they are not. And when you move it around, this will fall out. And then when you go to operate the shutter, you've got to push it all the way down to get the shutter to fire. So this is what contacts the bottom of the cable release when you're using a cable release to actuate the shutter. But yeah, make sure not to lose that black plastic part, and be careful not to lose the spring. So blow out the dust here. First thing I want to do is I want to clean the glass on the inside of the top cover. So once again, use some lens cleaning fluid on clean cotton swabs. Be careful of the black paint on either side of the windows. This can be rubbed off if you're too aggressive in the cleaning. Just a little bit of pressure is all you need. And then carefully wipe it off. I do the two windows first, and then the center window last. And also I'll clean around the front here on the body, because the lens body covers this and it's hard to reach. Okay, that looks good. And I want to clean the inside glass just a little bit more. Okay, that looks good. Alright, next thing we'll do is we'll work on the glass windows on the viewfinder itself. The CC and CCN use two lenses on the front of the viewfinder, and there's a gap in between them which is covered by this black tape. Sometimes the black tape doesn't seal well, and there can be haze between the front elements, and to clean it out you have to kind of pry the front one out carefully without chipping it or breaking it, and then that allows you to clean between them. This one here has no haze in between, so I don't have to mess with it. I'll take my, put that back, my needle nose pliers here and flatten out a cotton swab so I can clean inside. Like the full-size electrodes, these are the CC and CCN have a pretty high quality optics in the viewfinder and rangefinder systems, and the beam splitting mirror is very durable. You don't have to worry much about rubbing the coating off of it. Make sure to clean this little lens in between here. This is kind of easy to miss when you're working on one of these cameras, and if you get it clean, it'll make the rangefinder contrast a little bit better and make the camera easier to focus. Right, I clean the back of the beam splitting mirror. This camera is quite dingy on the outside, but the inside is quite nice. Clean around the reflecting mirror for the frame lines. And this is a common problem. This little dust cover, which goes over the exposure lamps, tends to come loose quite commonly on these cameras. Let me set that aside. Clean the top of the back of the mirror, because that's a clear section that the exposure arrows shine through and project into the viewfinder. Alright, and then I have to clean the rangefinder mirror, which is kind of hidden in an out of the way place, so I'll go ahead and bend these to an angle like this. And I can reach the rangefinder mirror right there. Okay. And another thing I can use this bent cotton swab for is cleaning the back of the viewfinder eyepiece. And I'll clean the outside of it too while I'm here. Alright, I'll do that one more time because I really want it to be nice and clean on the inside. Okay, and blow out any dust. If you need to adjust the rangefinder, right in the bottom here, there's a screw with a plus on it. It's not a Phillips screw, it's a slotted screw in a plus, so you can use a slotted screwdriver to adjust, and that's for the infinity adjustment, or should I say horizontal adjustment. And then the vertical adjustment you make through the battery chamber. If you take the battery cap off and remove the battery, right in this section here you'll see kind of a slot cut and a silver screw back there, and that's how you adjust the vertical adjustment for the rangefinder. You can access both the horizontal adjustment you can get by removing the dust cover on the flash shoe, and as I said, just take off the battery cover and remove the battery in order to make the vertical adjustment. Alright, so the next step is to glue this on, because we don't want it rattling around and obscuring the light meter lights. Maybe 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 of these cameras I come across has this light cover has come loose. And sometimes it covers both of the lights here, and when you go to check the meter it looks like it's not working. Okay. Alright. And next thing I want to do is clean up the sides around the screws here, the sides of the top cover. I can do a better job when the screws are out and the cover's off. Another thing you have to be very careful with these cameras is this window here on top of the film counter. This often comes loose, and the way it's designed, it will fall inside the camera, and normally it gets caught up somewhere in the film winding mechanism, and then the camera won't wind or is jammed, and this is because this window has come loose. When you're cleaning a camera or wiping it off, be careful not to push it down on this, because more than likely it's going to come loose and fall down somewhere in the camera. Okay, so the next thing I have to do is replace the dust cover. Just a tiny bit of glue. I can see where it was glued on before. I'll just put a little bit of glue in the same spot. As little as possible. And drop that on like so. Alright, and the next thing to do is put the top cover back on. And this isn't as easy as it might seem to put the top cover back on. Oh, I have to do one more thing. I have to put the battery check lamp button in. So I have to lower this down, and I have to be careful of a couple things. First, I have to make sure the plastic button under the shutter button doesn't fall off. And I have to be careful that the back of this red button doesn't catch the top of the battery check switch. I have to make sure that it goes behind it. And how I do that is I hold the camera in a particular way, and I can see the back of the button of the switch, and I depress that in and then drop the cover down like so, and it's set in the right spot. Then I'll go ahead and replace the screws. Alright, then I will put on the film rewind knob, making sure not to forget about the washer. I'll put the spacer here. The cutout part on the spacer faces toward the rear of the camera. I put on the film winding shutter charging arm, put on the compression washer, and put the screw on top. Put it on thumb tight, and then replace the battery cover, and it's done. So that wasn't too long. It took me about maybe half an hour or so to do this, to disassemble the lens and clean it out on the inside, and also to disassemble and clean the viewfinder and rangefinder assembly. That's pretty much all there is to it. All that's left to do on this camera now is replace the light seals. I won't discuss that here. I already have a video showing how to replace light seals. So that's it for this camera. I'll finish cleaning it up, and then I'll be posting this on my online stores. I have Etsy and eBay stores, and I also have a new store, japanvintagecamera.com. Please check the description below the video for links to my stores if you're interested in buying this camera or another vintage Japanese camera. If you have any questions about the Yashica CC or CCN, feel free to ask them in the comment section below. If you want to see more videos about vintage Japanese cameras, camera repair, or photography in Japan, please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.